Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the third day of our Africana Sacred Healing Arts Conference. So glad you can be with us yet again. So you all have the schedule and you know the lay of the land here at this point. There's just one thing I did want to point out on our schedule. Today at 4 to 5 in the amphitheater downstairs, we have a section of the conference called Concluding Discussions. I know everyone's probably going to be pretty saturated and tired at that point in time, but we invite you to come to that. We're going to talk a little bit about future conference themes. We're going to ask your ideas about future conference themes, talk about formatting for the conference and different ideas. So it'll be a pretty wide open discussion that we hope you can join. We'd love to hear about your feedback for this conference and thoughts about the future. So if you can, please stick around for that. I unfortunately have to share some news with you that Professor Braxton Shelley will not be here today. He had a very urgent last-minute personal matter, and he sends his regrets. He did send us a clip of a video of another talk he has given that has material very close to our theme today, so we're going to make that part of the discussion. And with that, we will kick off our second Dialogic keynote, which is titled Healing Senses, Arts of the Afterlife, and I give you Dr. Kyrah Malika Daniels to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Eben. Good morning, everyone. I am back, and this morning we are continuing with our Dialogic keynote. It will be a bit of a different format because we have one scholar in person with us and one scholar joining us virtually in sort of past time, but I think it'll make still for a really dynamic and engaging exchange. And it is my honor today to note that it is May 18th, which is Haiti's National Flag Day. For those of you who are familiar with the legacy of Black Atlantic Rebellion and Revolution, you know that in 1791, on August 14th, a ceremony or a congress or both took place in the sacred grove of Bois Caïman, when revolutionary soldiers, Maroons from the mountains, and certain people of color who were freed gathered together and formed a mystic pact with the spirits to throw off the yoke of slavery and colonialism. And in a 13-year battle for independence, they established the Republic of Haiti on January 1st, 1804. Haiti emerged on that day not only as a Black republic in the Americas, but also as the first nation in the world to permanently abolish slavery. So very, very many exciting reasons to be joining in community today. It is my pleasure to introduce our Dialogic keynote speakers. I'm going to introduce Dr. Shelley first as our virtual component, and I will end with Dr. Bárbaro Martínez-Ruiz's introduction. Dr. Braxton D. Shelley is Associate Professor of Music, of Sacred Music and Divinity at Yale University. As a scholar, ordained minister, and experienced church musician, he works as a theorist of African American sacred music and currently serves as faculty director of the new interdisciplinary program in music and the Black church housed in the Institute of Sacred Music here at Yale. A native of North Carolina, Shelley earned his BA from Duke University and his PhD at the University of Chicago. His first book, Healing for the Soul, Richard Smallwood, The Vamp and the Gospel Imagination, was published this year. His second book, entitled An Eternal Pitch, Bishop G.E. Patterson and the Afterlives of Ecstasy, analyzes the great preacher's musical style, his use of radio and other media, and the digital reverberation of his ministry after his death in 2007. And we'll have an opportunity to hear a bit about his work on Bishop G.E. Patterson today. Dr. Bárbaro Martínez-Ruiz is the Tanner Opperman Chair of African Art History in honor of Roy Sieber at Indiana University. An art historian with expertise in African and Caribbean artistic, visual, and religious practices, his work challenges traditional disciplinary boundaries and examines the varied understandings of and engagement with art and visual culture. A native of Cuba, he earned his BA from the University of Havana and his PhD from Yale University. Some of his books include Congo Graphic Writing and Other Narratives of the Sign, as well as Art and Emancipation in Jamaica, Isaac Mendes Belisario and His Worlds, which received the College Art Association's Alfred H. Barr Award. Dr. Martinez-Ruiz is also an active curator whose shows have explored issues of visual communication, dislocation, and hybridity in the work of contemporary artists across the African diaspora. Let's give them both a warm welcome. So in the spirit of keeping things fresh and dynamic, today's Dialogic keynote will take a slightly different format from yesterday. I've asked both of our speakers to open with some remarks, 8 to 10 minutes of some of the incredible work that they do in Africana sacred arts and healing. We'll begin, I believe, with Dr. Martinez-Ruiz. Is that right, or would you prefer to begin with the video? What do you prefer?
Yeah, whatever you think is there.
Oh, you're not supposed to give me the choice. We'll start with that, and then we'll do a set of questions that we'll pose to Dr. Martinez-Ruiz, and then we'd love to open things up for questions from the audience, so please feel free to share your thoughts. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
So I'm going to turn the floor to Dr. Martinez-Ruiz, and he will be sharing with us some of his work and his slides.
Good morning, everyone. It's sometimes difficult for me to kind of come back here, and kind of find my place into the times and the memories connected to the place. But before, I would like to dedicate this exchange to the Divinity School, to the Institute of Sacred Music and the university as a whole, and also to Kyrah. And the last person is Robert Farris Thompson, who was my mentor and advisor, who passed. And concerns that I have on many people is about his legacy and what means for the study, not just of music and religions, and everything that connected to Africa and the African diaspora. And I think is that today I would like kind of channel his memories and incredible generosity as a mentor, father, friend, and scholar. Okay, thank you. And I was thinking in that how I can, in 10 minutes, introduce my work, and I kind of put a series of slides that can kind of illustrate what I wanted to say that is related to the topic of the conference and what we've been covering for the last 2 days. And the first you can see is one of the main questions for me when we study religions and African religions specifically is we tend to generalize about the meaning of religion, and we say, oh, this object has a certain kind of agency and do this and do that, specific, in issues related to healings or cure, or specific to art and visual pleasure. But we never really explain how this thing happened. I think I have more concern and to try to explain how things happen. And when we talk about the graphic writing systems, or the graphic writing in Africa and African diaspora, we never really explain how we create meanings, how we construct it, what are the building block principle, a particular way of form of writing in a place. And that kind of logic applied to the religion itself. And one of the problems is the area I study and do research in Central Africa, specifically in the Congo and the Congo diaspora. And since I've been doing research, most of the people who study and write about the Congo, no one really defined or no one really provide a name for the religion until today. Is a problem. The people we made, there is religion in the Congo, but we never really name it. We really never, there is not a single reference that would be, for me, fundamental in trying to understand the how to define that religion from that particular native perspective that is kind of missing in most of the studies. And I think it's what I wanted to kind of today is kind of remind us that we should begin from asking the Bakongo people to define that for us. What is the words they provide to us that can be useful and helpful in understanding the connection we are desperate looking to make between Africa and the African diaspora. And going back to this idea of how this object works, in somehow we claim there is a sense of agency in those objects, but we don't really know how they works. We don't have a way to explain properly. If cure and healing take place, what is the procedure that is in place to allow the thing happen? And I think what we can see here, these two images on the screen that show like X-rays of Nkisi or Mpungu. And you can see it's clear the materiality of the object and a specific type of object like nails and that the kind of contains and inside the body of Nkisi both. On the left is an Nkisi and Condi from the Dutch collections in Holland. That they did an X-ray, or you see the coin on the left from the 16th century, and the curator from the museum, when I went to a couple of years ago, she told me she had a trouble with the guard at the museum because she thought the guard put the coin inside Nkisi. And when they come out in the X-rays, she thought was a kind of odd object inside the object. And said, look, I think you should ask someone who knows about all coins. And turned out the coins inside Nkisi is value 1.2 million euros. It's even more expensive than the object that was kind of trapped in there after I asked for. And the second one, this was found in an attic in North Carolina. It's a family, African-American family, was doing reconstruction in their house. And when they started turning down the walls in the attics in the house, they find out these pouch or containers with nails inside. But you can see kind of the conversation, the continuity between the Africa and the African diaspora. But the question Kyrah asked me, and I think it's one of the questions about the conference about what is healing, how Bakongo people define or cure this particular concept that have a resonance in many aspects of our life. And I think it's the first one go back to, that will be useful to explain the notions that amplify this idea of healing to the concepts of Nkisi. And Nkisi is a term that comes from, rooted into a verb called kinsa, that means to take care. It's the actual root of the term Nkisi. That in somehow our historian translate Nkisi as a spiritual protections and doesn't have to do 100% to that. Spiritual protection is a form of healing, but it's not exactly the actual definition of what that means. But what we have here is the kind of providing few of the definition of what Nkisi means in the context of Bakongo artistic practice and religions and how they deal with issues of healings and how healing is kind of central for the artistic practice that they care about it. But I just wanted to kind of, I think it's very difficult for me, but I just wanted to look back into the idea of the words kinsa, that is the birth that rooted into the definition of the term Nkisi, and they have many different applications in everyday life and how these words kind of spread out through all of aspects of human activities, including traditional medicine into Western medicine. And Nkisi is medicine. That could be the first definition in which we can redefine what Nkisi is. Not just an object in a way we like. This kind of fetish relationship with Nkisi, we think it's something tangible, objectivable, and three-dimensional. And Nkisi is a teaching. It's just one of the idea of healing also associated with the idea, have a kind of pedagogical applications. And Nkisi is power. The power is more about the relationship between humans, the human context, human society, and the environment around Nkisi, about the community. And its healings at the end. And you can have all the three different definition applications from what Nkisi could be understood. But the visual, the way it's rendered, Nkisi is through this particular object. You can see here is a cauldron made out of wood that represents, there is a proverb in Kikongo called Makukwa Metatu Malembika Nekongo. That is very difficult for me to translate, but that means the proverb describes the story of three stones. They are running into the forest and they are crashing into each other. At that moment when they crash, they talk about themselves and about the forest. But also Makutu Matatu means the boundaries of a place. And the idea of cooking and the boundaries is very important for Bakongo because how they define it belonging to a place, the nation. The idea of belonging to a particular location, Nzi, that is the name of a religion is Makisinsi, is the sense of belonging, physical connection to a place. And medicine only takes place in understanding how these three stones, also the stones of the life and family, the idea of the three stones they are speaking and articulating oral history, memory, but also the three stones they are used for cooking, the one that glue the family together. And you can see here this idea of Makukwa Metatu also is a proverb that allows you to understand how far, how physical, the physical extent of your identity. And in a way, it's what you have through this particular art form. And I kind of repeat the cauldron, like a fractal into the cauldron on the top of the containers. And here is a Makuko Matatu also is the free stone the first king used to cook for the entire family, to build their own community. These are all the implication of that particular proverbs. And the idea of the medicine have three important components. One is the physical, is the bakulu. The second one is the physical, is the physical could be the rainforest of the environment. And the last one is emotional and feelings, emotions and feelings. The idea of healings and medicine target the three different aspects of a life of a person. And it's also represented with the triangle as a geometric shape is the basic graphic element that articulates these three principles. I just want to kind of show you here this idea of fire that can be used as a metaphor of cooking that glue and unify the family. Also is important for creating meanings and articulating those histories through the graphic writing system. And now you can see the graphic writing system in the Congo and the Congo diaspora as an aspect of this translation and understanding what healing means. By healing had to do with articulating narrative, articulating meanings and creating meaning that had to be passed from generation to the next. But also that knowledge had to be passed through fire. Fire is the element that allowed this writing to exist, is writing through flames and fire. And all of the basic graphic writing we have, like Veve in Haiti, they need fire to create meaning. The firmas in Cuba, they need fire to articulate meaning. Punto Riscado in Brazil, they need fire to articulate meanings. Without fire, you cannot create meaning. You cannot finish a sentence. In a way, the idea of cooking for making meal also is connected with the idea of creating meanings and communicate with knowledge and moral philosophy to the member of community. And I just want to show you here an example of how fire is used in the context. This was on the left in a ceremony for Simbi, a friend of mine in Haiti, that takes place every 50 years. And they invite me to do the ceremony for dance, and I was using fire to finish the whole process. And on the right, you can see the actual Simbi, it's a Simbi Veve. And Makisinsi is the term used to define the religions. And I just want to kind of finish with this idea of medicines. And the terms that used in the Congo traditions is there are two important concepts, cure and treatment, that is encapsulate the whole explanation, the whole understanding of medicine. And here, what I have kind of the structure that used, number one, bilongo is the medicines, and longo, the ingredient that allows the medicine to happen. The second one is a different type of expertise and treatments that take place through the process. Number three, the elements or spirit that give a sense and meaning to the cure and healing. And number four, the expert in those traditions, the four more important expertise in a cure and healings in the Congo tradition. So just to give a sense of how is organized the whole process of healing within the context of the Congo traditions. And here I just wanted to show you a traditional place in which you can see on the left, it's like 76 different type of ingredient they use to articulate, give a meaning to the Nkisi and Kondi. And you can see the Nkisi in the form of bottles on the back that they are made out of a combination of different plants. They are on the front of and 4 different variations. And on the right, this is one Nkisi that is used to protect the family. You make 4 of the different containers that have a skull, and you have to bury those container in the 4 corners of a house and protect the family. This is what I did when I used to live in South Africa to protect my family. I used to bury in the 4 corners of a house, and I could travel to other places. It's just one example. And I just to give it a sense of what ingredients go inside those Nkisi and what they do, what they articulate. And I just want to show you an example of the actual Nkisi or Mpungu they meet being produced today. It's one of the problems we have. The important anthropologists that work with the Congo, they believe the actual Congo tradition died. At the moment, they did research in 1967, 1968, but no one really made reference to the actual Nkisi practices today. And I just wanted to show you the continuities of Nkisi practice as we're speaking today. And this is Nkisi and Kodia that is deal with issues of illness. And there is a shelf, a freshwater shelf. And I just want to kind of this one has been very important during the COVID time. This one they also use in conversation with issues of related to COVID. And just another example here of Nkisi and Kondi. And the tying up as an important tradition is in Nkisi that a procedure that is important for understanding healings and treatment in the Congo tradition. Can I give you an example? And it's just a different type of knottings in the traditions and what that means. And I just wanted to show you the final ones. The idea of cooking on the top is from Kabasi. And this is from 1676. And Kabasi, who was a Capuchin monk, when he arrived to the Congo Kingdom, they have a problem that he didn't have a way to describe the process of making rains. That is what happened in the slides on the top. And he wrote in his book, I have a problem, I don't know how to translate into my own language, Italian, how to describe the process of raining. I need to use visual aid to describe the process of making. And he kind of replaced the wordings in Italian by explaining the importance of fire and cooking as the process, the manipulation, the environment, and nature in a way. And then you can see on the bottom is another slide that showed the 3 stone, that cooking stone, makuko matatu. But in this case here is connected to the Nkisi, is on the left next to the priest, the Ngudia, on the left, and making like a triangle between the husband on the back, her, and the client on the. And on the right is an Nkisi in the form of container that you will find in places like Cuba. And pretty much is a kind of continuity from Angola all the way to the diaspora. And there's another example of Mpungu from today in the form of container. And the last things I wanted to highlight is there is a myth in which I learned when I was a kid, and it's the story of Mambe. Mambe was a boy, or a teenager at the age of 18, that his father asked him to sacrificed his life for maintain a balance between nature and the village. And in this case, nature being represented to the leopard. And the entire story that you had to memorize as a kid is about self-sacrifice and determination to give your life for the member of the family. But also his death represents the beginnings of the Congo tradition in the diaspora, specifically in the Congo, because element of his body, they've been used to build the first Nkisi that, as far as we know, was constructed or produced in Cuba. But what I wanted to just highlight here is in the process of making the first Nkisi with the body, element of the body of Mambe, there are three important things that happened. He became an Nkisi, the first Nkisi, Creole Nkisi, you want to say. The divination also took place through the process, and the last one is about the graphic writing. And what we have here is the example of the graphic writings on the left is a graphic writing in the Congo, and on the top is a writing that takes place to a smell by using flowers and plants, and on the bottom is using kaolin, and this is the actual graphic writing from Cuba, and you can see the conversations between both sides of the Atlantic. And this is an example of writing from the 19th century, and on the right used by African-American artist Davy Hammonds that kind of evoke this long tradition of graphic writing in African-American culture. Thank you very much. I did a 10-minute. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that one of the elements of your remarks that I really want to highlight for us is in considering the Nkisi as healing agent, as source of knowledge, and as source of power. And I think that these are themes that we've already been discussing over the past several days, which is that healing agents can take the form of material objects, as we see with our Minkisi, that can be vessels, that can be pots, that can be statues. They can also take the form of something that has a more ephemeral quality. With our graphic writing systems that you've shared with us, they can be done in, more long-term form in the earth, but they can be done in Haiti, for instance, with veve in cornmeal and flour. And the reason that you make veve in ceremony in Haiti in cornmeal and flour is so that as the portal can be opened for spirit to come in ceremony, when people dance, when devotees dance, they also close the portal. It disappears so that spirits can return home. Our next speaker, who's not with us in person but in spirit, Dr. Braxton Shelley, is going to be speaking to us about this sort of third component of healing, which is the most ephemeral in some ways, orality, and thinking about the power of orality, of speech, of song, of prayer and worship in the space of the church. So now we're going to turn to that clip, and then we will come back.
Here, as in the preceding example, Patterson does not seem to suggest that this hastily assembled group of singers literally sang his falling melody in A-flat major, but there remains a claim, an assertion, a genre of action being worked out in relationship to the scripture. And I keep coming back to the idea of broadcasting as a name for what Bishop Patterson is doing to scripture here, but not only here. Because consider this clip from a 2006 sermon focusing our eyes upon the Lord.
But he takes the position, since it's not your battle, you don't need to fight. And since you don't need to fight, there's no need in brandishing weapons. Just hand pick you some singles. Yeah, take the singles and hide the army behind the choir. That's what he says. He says, let the singers go before the army. Usually you think the army is going to protect the singers, but here the singers are being protected by the army. Let the army get in the background. Put the singers in front. And I know they haven't had choir rehearsal. Yeah. But it's a short song. Yeah. And it won't take long for them to learn it. All they got to do is say, praise the Lord, for his mercy endures forever.
He does this. Here Patterson, clearly struggling with grave illness, returns to this treasured Old Testament pericope, and in so doing, he renders the same musical interpretation of its unfolding. This time he's in E. But yet he does the same thing in F a few days later in one of his last sermons at the Church of God in Christ 99th Annual Holy Convocation.
Put the army in the back. Put the choir in the front. Well, Lord, what are they going to sing? God said all they got to do is sing these 2 verses. But Lord, we haven't had time to rehearse. But all you got to do is go out there and say, praise the Lord, for his mercy endures forever.
Over the span of 5 years in 3 different sermons with 3 different titles delivered in 3 different keys, this same musical idea recurs. This bit of music would seem central to Bishop Patterson's hearing of this passage. It would seem to function as a kind of musical exegesis. But there's more to be said about the act of repeating, especially for someone so concerned with religious broadcasting, someone whose life's work had ensured that each of these statements would be captured, archived, and shared well beyond the original context of their expression. This re-articulation vents a recognition that being recorded means being enrolled in futures and pasts that one cannot wholly predict nor control. The repetition of this idea during Patterson's life foreshadows the reverberation of his message even after the messenger went to sleep. In Bishop Patterson's vast collection of sermons, another brief bit of music shows up over and over again. See it here in our first excerpt from today. I'm sure that the Patterson fans watching this presentation are nodding in recognition of the 5-note bluesy musical cell that is repeated with an astonishing frequency in the last 2 decades of Bishop Patterson's ministry. While it always functions as an intensifier, it takes on various guises. Often it functions as an ecstatic comment on a thoroughly musical unfolding, as in that version and in this one.
I want you to know whatever's going on in your life, hear the word of the Lord. His word.
Just as often, it proves critical to an emerging sentence.
Neither is there salvation in any other, for there's no other name under the heavens given among men whereby we must be saved, other than the name of Jesus.
In one form or another, this idea pervades Patterson's preaching, drawing preacher, band, and congregation deeper into a collective expression of praise, even into the last months of Patterson's preaching in the sermon you saw a minute ago.
I just want to tell you.
All the way to Patterson's last sermon on Christmas Day 2006.
I never shall forget.
In each articulation of this run, Patterson leans in, calling attention to the brief expression, one whose brevity gives it legs to move from one sermon to the next. Every time it appears, it joins a chorus of previous expressions and points ahead to future appearances, such that we might call this Bishop Patterson's eternal flame. Every expression of this idea manages to stand out amid an emphatically musical sermon, functioning as a self-conscious reflection on the work Patterson's sermons use music to do, an ecstatic moment in which Patterson's vocal instrument speaks for itself. Here, on a much grander scale, the repetition of this idea during Patterson's life foreshadows the reverberation of his message even after the messenger went to sleep. As early as the day of his death, media specialists were busy predicting his sermons, his messages' endurance. Patterson's media director is quoted in an article by James Dowd as saying that their vault included thousands of titles, from local sermons to national addresses, dating back to the 1970s, hundreds of which have never aired, so they plan to continue on as they had been. Dan Hubbard, Patterson's media buyer, stated that he was such a great preacher, one of the best in the country, that his programs continued to be top achievers and that they would be self-sustaining for a long time to come. While neither foretold the digital dimension of Patterson's reach, their confidence in his ministry's self-sustenance is remarkable, even if incomplete. Patterson's survival is communal. This is Patterson's antiphonal life, Shana Redmond's term for a call and response that take place in and beyond the time of physical animation. Alongside the persistence of Bishop Patterson's materials is a recurring assertion that these posthumous broadcasts still convey spiritual power. I'm interested in social media posts like this one, which recount National Kojic officer and Patterson's sister-in-law, Evangelist Frances Kelly, proposing that Bishop G.E. Patterson is still saving more souls from the grave than most saved from pulpits on Sunday morning. And I'm even more interested in the ActiveLegacy.com obituary, which tells the story of lifelong followers and new converts alike, deriving spiritual benefit from the bishop's posthumous archive. In May of 2017, more than 10 years after his death, Beverly C. described listening to Patterson's sermons on the Word Network and YouTube. That September, Monique from Canton, Michigan, detailed a daily listening practice, claiming that the departed bishop is still blessing people from the afterlife. Less than a month ago, a Floridian named Marion Milam confessed that she did not know that Bishop Patterson is deceased. She celebrates those who make it possible for her to miss this crucial fact, the family who ensure that his voice is still here teaching. If Malam's confession seems surprising, know that it is far from unique. I want to emphasize what it attests to: the uninterrupted telepresence and the ever-expanding digital archive that make the lack of physical animation anything but the point. As an anonymous commentator from March 2017 says, the bishop's sermons are more powerful after death than they were before. As these followers fan the flames of Patterson's afterlife, they are propelled by a convergent ecosystem: Patterson's ministry staff, contributors, social media users, and the digital architecture that sustain their sociality. It is really significant, I think, that Bishop Patterson died in 2007, just as Web 2.0's participatory culture was coming into sharp focus. Like the mechanisms that nourish the flame that burns in Memphis, these platforms play a crucial role in the bishop's digital afterlife. The virtual communities that they foster, the acts of sharing that they inspire, and the mediated and the recommendation algorithms that they encode keep a certain fire burning. In this way, the mediated afterlife reveals something about what Bishop Patterson embodied during his earthly sojourn: the broadcast of Pentecostal power, refueling an eternal flame. Who can tell if it will ever stop? Thank you.
Okay, so if no one else picked up on that, there was a real meta component of him talking about the digital archive, allowing us to connect with folks who are in different places, spaces, and time periods. And so we are very grateful for Dr. Shelley sharing this video. I wanted to pose just one question to you, Dr. Martinez-Ruiz, before we open it up for larger questions. And I'll have more questions in my arsenal just in case folks are feeling shy at first. But the question I wanted to pose is about the title of our Dialogic keynote for today, The Arts of the Afterlife. Can you share with us, in the traditions that you study in Mbanza Congo and Angola and Central Africa and also in Cuba, how is it that people are able to connect to the afterlife? How are they able to connect to the spirit realms using these art objects, using these graphic writing systems, using these musical traditions?
Well, this is a very complex question, but one of the, in the context of the Congo culture, the most important procedure that had to be in place to connect to the afterlife will be the actual graphic writing systems, because one of the problems linguistic and semiotic have with the language is the only language that takes place in society among people, and you cannot have a single individual cannot have a language. And the idea of a graphic writing system kind of challenged the traditional perception of what language and the function of language in society. And the graphic writing system allow not just to have articulate meanings between people in society, but also one individual with a past family member, with ancestor. I think now the writing moved into a different application that allow to create these you can create those levels of animation and exchange with family members who passed away a long time ago, or important people in the community, like, for example, Kimpa Vida, who was killed in the 16th century. And this is one aspect of the actual graphic writing system, is one particular practice that used to create those communication and exchange with, but the other, at the practical level, the religion, Makisinsi, is a particular ceremony called, a particular society that called Lembo. And that society, Lembo, that being translated by anthropologists in 70s and 80s, like Lemba, the Lemba society. Lemba is in the Congo term, Lemba is the act of cleansing bad memories and from the past, or preventing traumatic events that happened in the past that coming back into the idea of Lembar is what that means, is stop a tragic event. When someone died in a car accident or cancer, you had to do a ceremony that called Lemba that prevent those events to coming back in a cycle back into a family member. But Lembo is actual knowledge and ceremony that is authorized, and it's a particular tree that also called Lembo. It's a plant that when someone died, you had to plant that particular tree at the graveyard, and the actual physical response of this, the color in the leaf of that plant kind of responds to the actual spiritual vitality of the persons that is resides. Because in the Congo tradition, you don't die, you just go on vacation. And I think this is a very important concept among Bakongo people, the idea of journeying back and forth between different realms. And I think that is the kind of the two ways that you can have those frames, the questions that you ask. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to say two things before we open it up for questions. The first one is that I'm so grateful to you for mentioning that language is something that one cannot have as an individual person. Right? Language requires community. And actually, Charles Long says the same thing about religion, that you can have a spiritual path or a spiritual experience or journey, but that religion comes from the Latin religare, to bind. There are different contested terms of the origins of where religion comes from, but one is the Latin religare, to bind. And so you need community to have language, and you need community to have religion. And I think that that's something that we could say and extend to healing as well, right? You have to have a sort of experience between others. And the last thing I'll say very quickly, I'm so grateful that you mentioned Lemba. You see, y'all, this is why we got to do comparative work. Because Lemba is a tradition that I'm familiar with only in the context of Congo in terms of the written literature. We have scholars like, let's see, it's not Wyatt McGaffey, it's John Jansen, is that
John
right?
Jansen, yeah.
Who writes about Lemba tradition as a healing community, as a ritual community, but you especially mentioning that it is a cleansing of memories from the past, of intergenerational trauma is so powerful. In Haitian Vodou, we still have a spirit known as Lemba. And Lemba is not very often discussed, but is regarded as a spirit who walks with fire, and a cleansing fire, a purifying fire, which is something that you mentioned at the very beginning of your remarks. So this is why I think comparative work, especially in the Black Atlantic context, can be so illuminating, can be so insightful. So with that, we'd like to open it up. Questions, comments? Oh, yes, I see Mr. Hamilton has your hand raised. Please feel free to introduce yourself and pose your question or comment.
Hi, my name is Stephen Hamilton. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I'm just really struck by the first slide, because it's the comparison of, a ritual medicine in Congo and then one in the Americas. And so often Congo medicines, and as they're used by African Americans, are left out of mainstream conversation so much, especially considering how widespread they are. Especially in the South, all over the South. Have you done work focusing on Congo religious objects and sacred arts in the United States? And if so, could you, I know that this is a very broad question, but just thinking about the similarities or valences between that and what you find in the Caribbean and on the continent? I know that that's a very loaded question.
No, I think it's the challenge, and the challenge that was came out in the form of a question from Thompson was about how you create a methodology that helps you to understand this conversation, the flow from Africa and to the African diaspora. And the question from him was about why you need to understand, why it's important to make those align this particular aesthetic that emerged in the Congo in the diaspora. And he told me that is the wrong approach, because aesthetic is always subject to other external influence. And he kind of asked me to move, to create a different framework that allowed to understand the conceptual principle that are behind a particular aesthetic. And therefore, you're not comparing, looking for an apple and an apple similar to an apple in another place, no? Or a Ferrari. I think the example he used, a Ferrari. A Ferrari from 1930 is very different from a Ferrari from the 20th century. But it's still a Ferrari. But what is defined is a concept of a car, a vehicle. It's something that you use for transportation. I think he was kind of forcing me to think about the conceptual framework that define a particular practice rather than the external thing. In this particular regard, can I open up a different set of possibilities that is not unique of material culture that you will find in the religious practices, if you wanna. But you will have a lot of artists, specifically like David Hammons, that at the end of his, in the last few years, he decided to invest in this Congo element into his work, specifically to focus in the writings, how the writing is become a vehicle of that transmit, does engage with a particular spiritual practices. But the African American archaeological magazine 2 years ago, they arrived to doing research in North Carolina, Pimiclo farm, There used to be a plantation in 1724, and they discovered in doing archaeological research the Africans used to live, the slaves that used to work in the plantations at the time. They managed to produce terracotta at the time, and the terracotta from the Pamiclo farms of plantations in the 17th century. All of the terracotta, there are containers that used to been designed to storage fresh water. It's a very important detail, fresh water. And inside the container, they inscribe the cosmogram, the Dikenga cosmogram, inside to hold protect the water from inside the container, and in the base, in the back, that will be touching the ground. That is kind of emerged from the second important evidence that came out of this research. From the record from the plantation owner, the slave helped the owner to design the reservoir in the plantation for farming. And each of the mini lake they've been designed in the plantation used to have a particular name that start with the word Simbi. Well, was spelled written in a way that you could pronounce in English as XSYMBEA. That is pretty much Simbi, the Simbi you will find in Africa, in Central African context, in the Congo, that you will find Simbi Macaya. In Voodoo, you will find Simbi. In Cuba, you will find Simbi. In Brazil, in a Umbanda tradition. That I think it's more research had to be done, but it's just one area of material cultural productions produced in this context, in the context of African American life, that have been completely dismissed because we are thinking in modern and contemporary approach into that, rather than a tradition of terracotta and ceramic being in place and active in the 17th century by African people. You see also the actual applications of creating water reservoir for agricultural practice in which they use Simbi to bless that water for an efficient agricultural season. That is something never been studied before. It is just evidence that came out of this new kind of research in plantation context, because the idea of a slave used to be like a passive element in the whole ecosystem. Here kind of changed. The slaves, they also have an intellectual capital, a creative capital also being put into the economic process of a plantation at the time. That is the two examples, but this Kerry J. Marshall used a lot of graphic writing in the background on his painting. I think they are more important than the actual depiction. He made more in conversation with popular cultural themes. When you kind of remove the images, what you will have is Bebé and Firma from Cuba in the back, that telling the stories that he combined and created a kind of eclectic language by utilizing different graphic writing system in the diaspora. This is another example of Renee Stout is another African-American artist that used a specific reference to Nkisi or Minkisi traditions, and also being referred by study by someone like McGaffey. That is the most prominent of artists that kind of connected to that.
Thank you so much. To that list that Dr. Martinez-Ruiz has helpfully illuminated, I would also add, although I imagine you might be familiar with their work, Jason Young and Ross Michael Brown have done fantastic work on the Congo traditions in the U.S. South in particular. And in the lineage of Renee Stout, Vanessa German is a new artist who's really drawing from the Nkisi traditions in beautiful and dynamic ways. I think I saw 2 more hands for questions. Oh, 3. We're going to take all 3 questions and then we'll pose them all together at the same time. So Dr. Andrews and Mr. Edouard and Professor Nasrallah, please.
Okay, hello everybody. This was amazing information you just presented here, new to me, got my mind thinking in many different ways. But I'm going to take things to a different direction. This is directed at yourself, but also anyone in the room who can comment. We're talking about the afterlife and its role in healing generally, I guess. In the traditions I work in West African Vodou, Ewe cosmology, reincarnation is a big part of one's life. And related to that, it's the recognition or acknowledgement of that aspect of yourself that has been reincarnated from an ancestor. At times needs to be, if an affliction is affecting someone, at times they will point to this aspect, is that you're not giving attention to that aspect of your own being from one of your ancestors. I'm just curious if that's apparent at all in the Congo tradition that you've been working in, or for anyone else that works in different parts of the continent or the diaspora, if that's also relevant.
Wonderful, thank you. We're going to take the questions together. Professor Nasrallah and then Mr. Edouard.
Great. Thank you for that mind-blowing presentation. I want to return to a theme that we were just hitting on, and your comments about aesthetic versus conceptual frameworks. And I was wondering if you could return to the work of Renee Stout, Vanessa German, Titus Kaffar, Valerie Maynard, and others who are working in that Nkisi Nkondi tradition, but doing so as an artistic practice, and how or would we draw lines in relation to ritual and religion? My second question has to do with the Nkisi Nkondi, not so much in relation to healing, but in relation to justice. If I understand correctly, the use of the mbao, or the blades, placed sometimes within the figures, within the power figures, is used to mark contractual or legal issues, and I didn't know if you'd be willing to speak to that as well.
Thank you so much for that question. And finally, Mr. Edouard.
Thank you so much for this fantastic presentation. I'm curious about the temporality of sound and materiality as a source of healing and movement. The fragments, like the artifacts and the left behind and the sound segments, seem to be as potent in energy as they were when they were created, even now, despite the interruptions of enslavement. I wonder if the healing is initiated on contact, or if the power of the fragments travel through time, and would that mean that the healing was already provided from the start?
Thank you so much. And as a refresher for us, I'll pose those three questions again briefly. So Dr. Andrews is asking about reincarnation in the context of Congo cosmology. Dr. Nasrallah is asking about some of these artists of Congo traditions in the contemporary moment, but also specifically in Nkisi Nkondi and its role as justice seeker, if you will. And Mr. Edouard is asking about the temporality of sound. Is the healing happening on contact? So please.
Thank you. The first one, yes. And the reincarnations of going on vacations, as I said before, is part of the whole funerary tradition, in which when you design the funerary space for that person to go on vacation, is designed like a machine to travel back and forth through time and space. That is before that, the cosmogram, called the Kenga or Yowa, is also represent that motions between realms, and it's represented in the physical, in a graphic way, by representing the 4 cardinal points. There's the idea of blowing from south, or raising up from the south, from the underground into the surface, or from left to right, no? And you have positionings of the graphic elements that tell the story of migrating through time and space. Also, the Kenga represents also that migration notated through color, like yellow, that is the color of language and knowledge and wisdom. And the beginning of our journey, we are yellow first, and we turn into white. And this idea of color also tells the story of moving through nature in a specific hues, if you wanted to think in that way. I think that two elements are important. Also because cosmogram is important because you don't need in the Congo tradition to have any material object. You have with a cosmogram you can build the entire principle of the culture. This is why important the cosmogram more than anything else. That is the question, number one. The second one that is a little bit more tricky for me, and I had to. It's difficult because I wrote about René approach of Nkisi and Kondi, and what I thought was difficult for me to accept in her interpretations of Nkisi and Kondi, she didn't came into conversation with Congo artistic practice through the conceptual framework of the principle that online the actual practice. She enter into that particular set of artistic issues that concern to her through the aesthetic aspect. She was more like mimicking surface and materials and shape and forms rather than explaining the process of making an Nkisi, no? And what is the term they use, in Congo art called ensala anitu? That means the art of putting things together. That is how it's defined art. I mean, the actual artistic practice have a way to define what art means and how it's understood and practiced that she didn't use as a methodology to make her work, and that I have a hard time to make this kind of association with the Congo art, because the only approximation she used in her work was using the aesthetic element rather than the conceptual framework. That is the problem I still have with her. And I think what happened is that someone like McGuffey blessed the particular approach and kind of sanctifies her, or certified her project. The second question is a little bit more difficult because it had to do with the mis-explanations and representation of the nails, the use of the nails in Nkisi. When you design an Nkisi, the nails called nzonzo, and nzonzo translate into Kikongo as a profound thinking or big, deep thought. And Nkisi and Kondi means notating device. That it could be the most clear translation of what Nkisi and Kondi means. And Kondi, that people use the word for lion. That is not Kikongo. That is a different language. But what happened is when you design an Nkisi or an Mpungu, every client that come into contact with the person who have the knowledge of Nkisi, your problems, your issues had to be translated into something they call bilongo. Bilongo is the concept for medicine. And that would be a combination of different plants that represent specific issues. I can deal specific issues from domestic impotence or infidelity, family disputes. All of these plants have a specific use in that. And what happened is the Nganga Mauku, who is the expert in that particular Nkisi, have to design the medicine that match your case study. And when that medicine is created, a hole had to be made in the surface of Nkisi, and that medicine had to be placed. And now the nails had two functions in the actual Nkisi and Kondi. The nail, what do is to seal that medicine inside the Nkisi to prevent that medicine to fall off and allow the Nkisi to be able to find a resolution for that issue through time. And it needs to take place through, the Nkisi had to be humid. All of original Nkisi, all of the Nkisi, they had to be humid throughout their life. When we go to the museum, the one here on display, the Nkisi, they are dry. That means they are not working. The chemical reaction that needs to take place through the Nkisi to solve the problem is not taking place. Also, the nails also have a second function. It's more like a kind of dialectic application of the Nkisi and Kandi. When the solution, the Nkisi find a solution, the nail has to fall off and prove to the Manganga Mauku the problem being solved. The Nkisi find a solution for that. And what I'm trying to say is the Nkisi, the nails in one hand allow you to notate the range of cases the Mpungu is able to solve. They could be from meditation to protection of the family, issues with family disputes, etc. But at the same time, allow you to understand the actual relationship between the healing process and the time that had to be created to solve those issues at the same time. But what happened is the association of Nkisi is it's kind of been filtered to Hollywood fantasy. In most of the writing, including the an article being written a month ago, the Nkisi is a terrifying device. The nails amplify or highlight the violence that is inherent to the Congo tradition as a whole, because the Congo tradition being framed as a violent thing. And the Nkisi is emblematic of this sense of violence that we believe the Congo religion, define the Congo religion. And therefore, there is no way out of recalibrating the use of the Nkisi in the actual process and the functionality of the object in itself within the context of the religion. That is what is missing right now. And I don't know if I answered the questions. And the last one is about sonic materiality of the sound. That is a very interesting. In the context of the Congo religion, there is a procedure or a performance or a ritual that called makinsilu. Makinsilu is an articulation in a space of lyric, music, body gestures, and dance. And there is an Nkisi called Nkisi in Zulu that is responsible for everything that has sound quality. And Nkisi is the one that hold that event together. And that is one of the music, each of when you build a drums, for example, you had to bring that simbi inside that drum in order to allow that drum to speak back into the community. Without that simbi, it's just an object. It's just an object for displays. It's not a musical instrument. They only become a musical instrument when the life or the vitality of that simbi of the sound is held inside that object. It has to be built and prepared for that simbi to reside inside that instrument. But there's other application, for example, in the context of the court cases and the legal disputes. When you go to the court, they call lumbu, you're not allowed to speak your issues. You have to translate your issue into a song. And when you create a lyric that match with your personal problem, you have to invite your friends to become the music ensemble for you at the court. And you have to perform your case, your issue. For example, your brother doesn't want to give you the right over the land. That is one of the most important cases, the land dispute. And you had to sing that song into the court that is made out of 40 women and 40 men, over 70. I think you had to be over 70 to be member of a lumbu. There have been this court over 600 years in that particular place. And the court, all the members of the court, they record that into, there is someone who memorized all of the song, that his job, and the family called Seke Seke, that his job is to memorize all of the song of court cases ever, the court had to deal with. And the court had to meet and write another lyric and respond back to you in the form, as it performs. I mean, the music now become to solve issues, the legal issues, but also music in the context of the religious context. Without music, you cannot have this process of healing, because you need to have Simbi, that Simbi in Zulu, that is the one responsible for sounds, that is anime, the physical, interaction between people. That is the. I can talk more, but I don't want to bother you with all of these details and things. Yeah.
I think this is why so many of our traditions in Africa and the African diaspora include a feeding of the drums, a baptizing of the drums, a naming of the drums, assigning of godparents to drums, because they are living entities themselves. And as we've seen with so many of our wonderful presentations about music, we can think about these ephemeral qualities of healing in conversation with these material qualities of healing. So let's give a warm welcome and thank you so much, Dr. Bárbaro. I have to say this was a special treat for me because Dr. Bárbaro Martínez-Ruiz was my first teacher. So.